Two black teenage sisters take their seats in first class. A hush follows them down the aisle. A flight attendant leans in. "Are you sure you belong here?" The scanners have already beeped green, yet suspicion speaks louder than proof. What happens when dignity is tested at 30,000 feet? When a pair of plastic zip ties becomes a threat? When thousands join a live stream in real time? When a father's voice comes through a speaker and freezes an entire cabin? Can one phone call force an airline to face its culture? Can two 16-year-olds change how a country thinks about who gets to belong? Will silence keep them safe? Or will silence become a cage they refuse to live in? Meet Imani and Zara Carter. Meet the witnesses who stood. Meet the people who faltered. And meet the leaders who chose a harder road so the skies could be different tomorrow. This is Flight 402. This is the moment the world stopped looking away. If this story moves you, tap like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Now take a breath and step into the cabin with us. The airport was alive with the usual mix of voices, rolling suitcases, and the faint smell of coffee from the nearby cafe. For most travelers, it was just another Tuesday morning. But for Imani Carter and her twin sister Zara, this day had felt like the start of something special. At just 16, the sisters had already grown used to traveling. Their father often sent them to visit their grandmother across the country, and though they were still teenagers, they carried themselves with a maturity that made them seem older. Their mother always said the girls had old souls, the kind that could sit quietly in a storm and somehow make the air feel calm again. Imani walked with her usual grace, a book tucked under her arm. She loved to read while waiting to board, and she always chose something meaningful. This time it was Maya Angelou's collected poems. Zara, on the other hand, had her phone in hand, earbuds dangling, capturing snippets of airport life for her social media page. The two couldn't have been more different in personality. Yet when seen side by side, they carried the same quiet strength. As they approached the gate for SkyNova Airlines Flight 482, the girls handed over their boarding passes. The scanner beeped green. The agent smiled politely. Everything seemed ordinary. They strolled down the jet bridge together, giggling about something silly Zara had said. When they stepped into the aircraft, the contrast of sound was immediate. Outside, the terminal had been loud, restless. Inside the first-class cabin, it was hushed, almost reverent. Plush seats, dim lighting, and the faint notes of instrumental jazz gave the illusion of calm wealth. For the sisters, it was new, but not foreign. Their father had booked them first-class tickets as a treat, insisting that they deserved comfort and respect. Zara dropped into seat 2B with her usual energy, tossing her jacket over the armrest. Imani slid into 2A, smoothing her skirt and placing her book carefully in the seat pocket. She let out a small breath, almost a sigh of relief, as if she had been carrying invisible weight all morning. "First class," Zara whispered with a grin. "Guess we're living the good life today." Imani smiled but stayed quiet, opening her book. She was always more cautious, more aware of how people looked at them. From the corner of her eye, she noticed two businessmen in row 1 glance back with a flicker of surprise. She didn't need to hear their thoughts to know what they were. Two young black girls in first class must be a mistake. It wasn't the first time. As the rest of the passengers trickled in, Imani reminded herself of her father's words, repeated like a mantra. Stay calm, stay respectful, but never give away your dignity. The sisters settled in, buckling their seat belts. A flight attendant moved briskly down the aisle, checking bags and overhead bins. She had sharp features, blonde hair pulled back into a bun, and an air of authority that seemed a little too forced. Her name tag read Melissa Hart. Imani noticed the pause. Melissa glanced at the twins, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. It was just a flicker, but to someone who had felt that stare before, it was enough. Zara, oblivious at first, tapped through her phone. But Imani felt the weight of the gaze and sat a little straighter. Melissa approached slowly, lips pressed into a thin line. She leaned in just slightly, her voice low but edged with suspicion. "These seats," she said. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Imani's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice soft. "Yes, ma'am. Seats 2A and 2B. She held up the boarding passes with steady hands. Melissa gave the passes a quick glance but didn't even scan them. Instead, she pursed her lips, clearly unconvinced. "These are premium seats," she said, as though the girls didn't know. "First class isn't open seating." Zara finally looked up from her phone, her face shifting from playful to defensive. "We know," she said. "Our dad bought these." The attendant's brows rose. "Your father bought them," she repeated, the words carrying just enough disbelief to sting. Imani touched Zara's arm, a gentle warning. "Don't escalate. Not yet." Melissa stood there a moment longer, then moved on, but not without a final glance back, the kind that said, "I'll be watching you." The sisters exchanged looks. Zara rolled her eyes, whispering, "Here we go again." Imani didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her book and tried to read, though her eyes lingered on the same line over and over. Inside. Her thoughts tumbled. Why does it always start this way? Why do people assume we don't belong? Dad says to stay calm. But what if staying calm just means staying silent? What if silence looks like acceptance? She folded the corner of the page and closed the book. Her hands trembled slightly, hidden under the tray table. She hated that Melissa's words had gotten under her skin. Zara noticed. "Don't let her bother you," she whispered. "We belong here. Period." Imani nodded, but her chest still felt heavy. The cabin grew quieter as boarding finished. Passengers settled into their seats. Attendants closed overhead bins, and the pilot's voice came over the intercom with the usual greetings. But for Imani and Zara, the air had already shifted. They could feel the eyes on them, the unspoken question hanging in the room. Do they really deserve to be here? Imani glanced out the window at the tarmac below, where workers loaded luggage into the belly of the plane. She thought of her father back home, probably in a boardroom surrounded by executives, discussing contracts worth millions. He had told them stories of how dignity was tested in small places, a restaurant, a school, a plane, and how those small moments revealed the truth of society. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Stay calm, stay respectful. Don't give away your dignity." Beside her, Zara leaned back in her seat, phone still in hand, and muttered, "But if they push us, I'm not staying silent this time." The hum of the engines grew louder. The plane trembled as it prepared for takeoff. The sisters sat side by side, unaware that the short flight ahead would become the story that shook an entire industry. The flight had only just begun to settle into routine when the tension returned. The safety demonstration played across the cabin monitors. The practiced smiles of the attendants on display. Passengers leaned back, some scrolling through phones, others flipping through magazines, their expressions already sinking into that familiar flight time patience. But for Imani and Zara Carter, the quiet was deceptive. Beneath it, a storm was brewing, and they could feel its first gusts. Imani tried to focus on her book again, though the words blurred. She traced the page with her finger, as if the rhythm might calm her. She told herself that Melissa Hart, the attendant who had questioned their seats, would let it go. People made assumptions all the time. If she gave Melissa the benefit of the doubt, maybe this would pass like a small shadow over sunlight. But Zara wasn't buying it. She leaned toward her sister, her voice low but brimming with defiance. "She's not done with us. You know?" Imani sighed, glancing sideways. Not yet." "I'm serious," Zara whispered. "I've seen that look before. She's going to come back, as if on cue." Melissa reappeared in the aisle. This time she wasn't alone. She walked with the gate supervisor, Robert Hensley, a man in his 50s with thinning gray hair, square glasses, and a posture that radiated the authority of someone too used to being obeyed. He scanned the rows, as if searching for trouble, before Melissa directed his attention to seats 2A and 2B. "There," she said quietly but firmly, pointing at the girls. Robert stepped closer, his expression unreadable but already tinged with doubt. He looked at Imani and Zara as though they had crashed a private dinner party. "These seats are not for everyone," Robert began. His tone was condescending, the kind used for children who had wandered into places they didn't belong. "Ladies, I think there's been a mistake. You'll need to move to coach." Zara sat up straighter, heat rising in her chest. "There's no mistake. We're in the right seats. Our tickets say first class." Imani quickly held out the boarding passes again, her hands steady but her heart pounding. "See seats 2A and 2B. They scanned at the gate." Robert took them, glanced briefly, and handed them back with a shake of his head. "Sometimes these systems make errors. Let's avoid a scene. Gather your things." Imani's jaw clenched, but her voice stayed measured. "Sir, there is no error. These are valid tickets. We paid for them." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who purchased them?" "Our father," Zara shot back. Robert gave a humorless chuckle. "I see. And what does your father do that he's putting two teenagers in first class?" Zara bristled, her fingers tightening around her phone. "That's none of your business." Imani placed a hand on her sister's arm, grounding her. "He bought them. That's all that matters." But Robert had already turned to Melissa, muttering loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We've had issues with people sneaking into premium before. Can't take chances." The words weren't just for Melissa. They were for everyone watching. And people were watching now. A few passengers leaned forward, pretending to be absorbed in their newspapers, but very clearly listening. Two men across the aisle shook their heads, whispering. A woman in row 3 pursed her lips, eyes darting between the sisters and the crew. Zara felt the weight of the stares, the silent judgment pressing in. Her chest burned. She hated being made a spectacle. She hated even more that her sister was sitting there, forced to swallow dignity for the sake of peace. She lifted her phone, tilting the screen subtly toward her lap. With a few quick taps, she went live. The camera lens faced her and Imani, angled enough to capture Robert standing in the aisle. "Flight 4A2. Zara whispered into the mic. "First class, and they're telling us we don't belong." At first, the livestream viewer count was small, just a handful of her followers who received the notification. But the comments started trickling in. "Wait. What happened, girl? Record everything. Don't let them gaslight you." Robert hadn't noticed yet. Melissa, however, did. Her eyes flicked toward the glowing screen, but she chose to ignore it, perhaps too confident that nothing could come of it. Imani, meanwhile, felt her pulse racing. She wanted to believe reason would win out, that once they checked the tickets properly, this would end. But a part of her knew better. Too many times she had seen the same script play out, in schools, in stores, in neighborhoods, respect given reluctantly, or not at all. Her inner voice whispered, equal parts doubt and determination. Maybe if I explain again, maybe if I show them we're calm, rational, polite, maybe then they'll listen. Or maybe they don't want to listen at all. Maybe the story has already been written in their heads. She breathed in slowly, trying to summon the calm her father always spoke of. "Sir," she said to Robert, her tone even, "with respect, you're making an assumption that isn't fair. We're here with valid tickets. We've done nothing wrong." Robert's expression hardened. "This isn't about fairness. It's about rules. And the rule is, if there's any question, we move people until we sort it out. Now please get your things." Melissa nodded beside him, arms crossed like a guard at a gate. The comments on Zara's livestream grew faster now. The viewer count jumped into the hundreds. Someone typed, "Classic case. They don't want to see us where they don't expect us." Another tagging news pages right now. "Keep filming." Zara held the phone steady, her anger simmering beneath the surface. She wanted to lash out, to tell Robert exactly who their father was, exactly how wrong they were. But she remembered Imani's hand on her arm, the silent plea to wait. Imani turned to her sister, her eyes heavy with unspoken conflict. "Do we call Dad now, or do we try to fight this ourselves?" The thought weighed on her. Their father had told them not to lean on his name too quickly, to try to stand on their own strength first. But how long could they sit in these seats, humiliated? Before that strength broke, Zara leaned close, whispering through clenched teeth, "Say the word, and I'll call him." Imani hesitated, her throat tight. "Not yet. Not yet." The silence stretched, the cabin heavy with expectation. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some sympathetic, others annoyed at the delay. Robert tapped his foot impatiently. "Finally." Melissa spoke again, her tone sharp. "If you refuse to move, we'll have no choice but to call airport security. And trust me, that will be far worse for you." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Imani felt her chest tighten. Her mind spiraled with questions she didn't want to ask. What if they actually drag us out? What if this live stream isn't enough to protect us? What if silence keeps us safe, but at the cost of our dignity? And what if speaking costs us everything? Her eyes met Zara's, and in that moment, the sisters shared the same unspoken thought: this was only the beginning. The cabin grew quieter, but it wasn't the comfortable hush of a plane preparing for departure. It was the uneasy silence of people watching something unfold they weren't sure they should interfere with. Every click of a seat belt and shuffle of a bag seemed louder against the tension stretching across the aisle. Robert Hensley stood firm, arms crossed now, his presence heavy in the narrow space. Melissa Hart remained at his side, lips pressed into a line of authority, her eyes darting occasionally to passengers who leaned closer, eavesdropping. For a moment, the plane itself seemed to tilt under the weight of scrutiny. Imani's heart pounded. She could feel every eye on her and her sister. The businessmen in row 1, the woman in 3, the man across the aisle pretending to read, but staring over the edge of his newspaper. Even the air carried judgment, thick and heavy. Zara's live stream was climbing quickly now. Hundreds of people were watching, then over 1,000 comments flashing across her screen like sparks. This is unbelievable. Keep filming. Don't let them push you around. The stream's presence gave her courage, but it also made her feel exposed. Every word, every glance was being captured. Robert cleared his throat, his voice louder this time, projecting for the cabin to hear. Ladies, this is your final chance. Gather your belongings and come with me to coach seating. We don't have all day. The way he said it, dismissive and public, made Imani's stomach twist. He wasn't just ordering them around. He was performing authority, performing control for an audience of strangers. Imani raised her chin slightly, though her voice trembled. Sir, we have valid tickets. We have the right to sit here. You are treating us unfairly. Robert shook his head, smirking faintly. Unfair would be letting people stay where they don't belong. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The murmur of passengers grew louder. Whispers traveled through the rows. Someone muttered, This doesn't look right. Another voice, sharp and irritated, hissed, Just move so we can leave already. Zara's anger flared. She shot back at Robert, her voice louder, breaking the hush. Where we don't belong. What's that supposed to mean? Robert's eyes flicked around, aware of the growing audience but refusing to back down. It means these seats are for people who actually purchase them properly. Not mistakes. Not. He stopped short, but the implication hung in the air. Zara's phone caught it. The comments lit up instantly. Did he just imply what I think he did, racist undertones all over this? Expose him! Melissa stepped in, voice sharp, her patience gone. Enough. You've been asked politely. Security will be here in a moment to remove you. Imani's pulse hammered in her ears. She clutched the boarding passes tighter in her hands, the edges bending. The humiliation was unbearable, not just the idea of being forced out of the seat her father had bought for her, but the way it was happening, publicly, loudly, as though she and her sister were criminals. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, her thoughts spiraled. Do I stay calm? Do I keep my dignity? Or do I fight back now if I fight? They'll see me as the angry black girl, justifying everything they already believe. If I stay silent, I'm letting them erase me, erase us. Which choice leaves me whole? Zara leaned close, whispering fast. It's live. Everyone sees. Don't fold now. If we back down, we'll disappear into nothing. Her sister's fire sparked something in Imani, but fear still wrapped around her chest. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A man in row 4 finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. Excuse me, but if their tickets are valid, why can't they stay? Robert turned sharply, his face reddening. Sir, please mind your own business. We're handling this. But the moment had cracked. Others started murmuring more boldly. One woman pulled out her own phone, filming from across the aisle. Another whispered loudly enough for others to hear. This is outrageous. Then came a voice that carried authority, clear and steady. From row 6. A woman stood slowly, leaning on the headrest in front of her for support. Her silver hair framed a face lined with age, but marked by confidence. Margaret Fields, a retired judge, had watched long enough. I saw those young women board, she said firmly. I saw their tickets scan. They belong in those seats. What I'm seeing here is not about tickets. It's about assumptions. The cabin froze. Margaret's words sliced through the air, undeniable and heavy with truth. Robert's jaw clenched, but before he could reply, the sound of footsteps echoed up the aisle. 2 uniformed officers entered, their presence commanding immediate silence. Officer Daniel Brooks led the way, tall, broad-shouldered, his expression set in stone. Behind him, Officer Karen Lopez carried the restrained energy of someone ready to act fast. Brooks spoke first, his tone curt. "What's the situation?" Melissa pointed at the twins as though presenting evidence. "They're refusing to move. Wrong seats, no cooperation." Imani opened her mouth, but Brooks cut her off with a raised hand. "Enough. Gather your things. Girls, let's not make this difficult." The humiliation burned hotter now. He hadn't even asked to see their tickets. He hadn't questioned Melissa or Robert's story. He simply looked at them, two young black girls, and assumed the verdict. Guilty. Zara's livestream view count soared past 3,000. Comments filled the screen in real time. Police didn't even check proof. "This is insane. We're watching you. SkyNova." Imani's hands shook as she held up the boarding passes again. "Please," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "These are valid. Look. Just look." But Brooks didn't. He stepped closer, towering over them. "I said, get up. Don't force us to take further action." Zara raised her phone higher, angling it to capture everything. "You're live," she announced. "Thousands of people are watching right now." For a flicker of a second, Brooks faltered, but then Karen Lopez stepped forward. Her eyes narrowed. She reached into her belt and pulled out a pair of zip ties, holding them up where everyone could see. "This doesn't have to go that way," she said coldly. "But if you don't comply, we'll escort you off in restraints." The cabin gasped collectively. The tension snapped into sharp fear. Imani's breath caught in her throat. The idea of being dragged off the plane, tied up like a criminal, filled her with a dread she could barely name. Her mind screamed questions. Do I let them? Do I stay silent? Do I call Dad now? He told us to try first. But what if trying means being humiliated in front of the world? Her hand trembled over her phone. She could see her father's name on the screen from earlier missed calls. She hadn't answered. She hadn't wanted to bother him, hadn't wanted to make this about his power. She had wanted to stand on her own. But now the walls were closing in. Zara leaned close, whispering, fierce and desperate, "Imani, call him. Call Dad. Now." Imani's chest tightened. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the choice pressed down like the cabin air itself. The humiliation had reached its peak, and somewhere deep inside, a shift began. The plane felt smaller by the second. The cabin air, already heavy with the recycled smell of metal and fabric, seemed to shrink around Imani and Zara. Every passenger was silent now, caught between discomfort and fascination, as though they were watching a play that had shifted suddenly from comedy to tragedy. Officer Brooks loomed closer, his voice firm but stripped of patience. "This is your last chance. Get up, or we'll have to remove you by force." The way he said it, final, absolute, made Imani's stomach lurch. She wanted to disappear, to vanish from the rows of eyes staring at her. But there was no escape. She could feel Zara beside her, practically vibrating with fury, holding her phone high so every angle of the confrontation streamed into the digital world outside. The comments poured in faster than Zara could even glance at them. Unbelievable. They didn't even check the tickets. Stay strong. Sisters. A few viewers tagged news outlets. Others tagged activists. Lawyers. Anyone with influence. The world beyond the cabin was beginning to stir. But inside, the danger was real. Lopez's fingers tapped the plastic restraints against her palm, the sharp snapping sound making Imani flinch. She looked around desperately, hoping for someone, anyone, to intervene. The businessmen in row 1 stared rigidly ahead, unwilling to be part of the moment. The woman in 3 kept shaking her head but said nothing. Even those filming didn't speak. Then Margaret Field's voice cut through again, steady as a gavel. "Officers, I'm telling you, I witnessed them board with proper tickets. You have no grounds for removal." Brooks turned to her sharply. "Ma'am, unless you want to be removed too, stay seated." The threat landed with chilling weight, but Margaret didn't flinch. Her chin lifted higher. "I served as a federal judge for 30 years. You will not intimidate me with baseless threats." A murmur of surprise rippled through the passengers. Some straightened, emboldened by her courage. A man in row 5 spoke up now, louder. "She's right. Check their tickets before you drag 2 kids out in front of us." The cabin, once a silent stage, was shifting. The chorus of doubt was rising. Phones tilted higher, cameras clicked, and whispers grew louder. Brooks' jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged. He gestured toward the sisters. "We don't have time for theatrics. Off the plane. Now." Imani felt tears sting at the corners of her eyes. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not like this. She heard her father's voice in her memory. "Stay calm. Stay respectful. Never give away your dignity." She clung to it like a lifeline. Her voice shook but remained steady enough. "Please, just look at our tickets. That's all we ask." But Brooks didn't. Instead, Lopez took a step closer, the zip ties hanging ready. "Hands where I can see them. Don't make this harder." The humiliation was unbearable. The plane, the strangers, the cameras. It all blurred around Imani. She could hear her own heartbeat louder than the engine hum. Her hand hovered over her phone again. She imagined her father's voice on the other end, calm and commanding. She imagined him hearing the quiver in her voice, the way she was barely holding herself together. But another thought intruded. If I call him now, will they think I'm only strong because of his power? Will they dismiss me even more? Zara noticed her hesitation and whispered sharply, "Imani, stop doubting. This isn't just about us anymore. Thousands are watching. If they drag us out, we'll be another headline. Call him. Let him see. Let the world see." The livestream counter jumped again, now past 7,000. Comments screamed across the screen. "Call your dad. Lawyer up. Don't let them win." Imani's breath shuddered. She lifted her phone halfway, her thumb hovering over her father's name in the contact list. But she froze again, trapped in her own tug-of-war. If I call, I admit I can't do this alone. If I don't, we could lose everything. Brooks extended his arm now, his hand open, ready to grip her shoulder. "On your feet. Right now." Imani flinched, shrinking back into the seat. And then a new voice rose deep, resonant, filled with conviction. A man from the rear of the cabin stood up, his phone raised high. "Everything is being recorded," he said loudly. "If you touch those girls without cause, it will be on every news station by morning." Brooks stopped short, his eyes flashing with irritation. Lopez glanced at the growing sea of phones pointed their way. For the first time, uncertainty cracked their confidence. The officers exchanged a glance, a silent conversation of calculation. They were losing control of the narrative. Robert Hensley, still standing by Melissa's side, leaned in quickly, hissing under his breath. "Don't back down. If we let them stay, we look weak." Melissa nodded, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. She hadn't expected the passengers to push back this hard. She hadn't expected the girls to resist this long. Imani felt the shift. It was small, fragile, but real. The passengers weren't just watching anymore. They were participating. They were witnesses, yes, but also defenders. Her hand trembled as she finally pressed her father's name on the screen. The line rang once, twice, then his voice came through, deep and steady. "Imani, what's wrong?" The sound nearly broke her. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "Dad, we're on Flight 482. They're trying to kick us off. They won't look at our tickets. They called security. They're threatening to tie us up." There was silence on the other end, but not empty silence. The kind filled with calculation, with the weight of someone powerful deciding how to move. "Put me on speaker, Dr. Jonathan Carter said. Imani's fingers shook as she tapped the button. His voice filled the cabin, strong and commanding. "This is Dr. Jonathan Carter. My daughters are sitting in first class with tickets purchased under their names. If one more hand is laid on them, SkyNova Airlines will face consequences you cannot begin to imagine." The name landed like thunder. Melissa froze. Robert blinked, recognition flickering. Brooks frowned, unsure. Even Lopez lowered the zip ties slightly. Passengers gasped. A few whispered. Someone mouthed, "Jonathan Carter." The name was not unknown. Carter Aeronautics was a titan in the aviation world. Engines, safety systems, maintenance contracts if planes flew. There was a good chance Carter's company had a hand in it. Imani looked at her father's name glowing on the phone screen, a mixture of relief and guilt washing over her. Relief that he was there, that his voice cut through the noise, guilt that she hadn't been able to do it alone. But Zara leaned closer, whispering fiercely, "This isn't weakness. This is power. They wanted us small. Now they'll see who we are." Jonathan's voice continued, unwavering. "You have exactly one chance to correct this. Recognize their tickets, apologize, and seat them properly. If not, I promise you, this flight will never leave the ground." The silence that followed was heavier than anything yet. The officers looked to Robert. Robert looked to Melissa. Melissa stared at the twins, her authority slipping. Passengers shifted, some grinning now, some whispering in awe. The livestream comments exploded. "Oh my God, it's her dad. Power move. They're finished." And in that charged silence, Imani realized the tide had turned. The humiliation had reached its peak. But now, perhaps, so had their strength. The silence after Jonathan Carter's voice filled the cabin was like a vacuum, pulling every sound out of the air. For a few suspended seconds, nobody moved. Not the officers, not the attendants, not even the passengers who had been whispering so furiously only moments before. Imani's hands trembled where she held the phone, the speaker still glowing, her father's presence cutting across thousands of miles with undeniable force. Zara sat straighter, a fierce spark in her eyes as if her father's voice had ignited something unbreakable in her chest. Finally, Robert Hensley broke the silence, his voice shaky but still trying to carry authority. "Sir, with all respect, this is airline protocol." "Your daughters were Jonathan's voice cut him off, sharp as a blade. "Protocol. Do not speak to me of protocol while you violate it in front of an entire plane. Protocol begins with verifying facts before humiliating paying passengers. Protocol is fairness. What you're doing is abuse of authority." A few passengers applauded softly, the sound awkward but undeniable. Robert flushed crimson. Melissa shifted uneasily, her arms dropping from their defensive fold. Jonathan continued, his voice colder now. "Officer Brooks, Officer Lopez, you are on speaker. I suggest you consider the liability of acting against two minors with valid tickets, especially while thousands are watching this live feed. I will personally ensure every badge and every uniform here is reviewed if one more threat is made. The officers froze, caught between pride and self-preservation. Brooks' jaw worked as though grinding words he could not say aloud. Lopez slipped the zip ties back into her belt with a flick of her wrist, masking the gesture as casual. But the retreat was obvious. Imani's chest loosened slightly, though her heart still pounded. Relief and shame tangled inside her relief that her father had shifted the tide. Shame that it had taken his power to make them seen. Zara, on the other hand, thrived in the moment. She angled her phone toward herself, her voice steady as she narrated for the live stream. You hear that they didn't want to check our tickets, but Dad's on speaker now. Thousands of you watching. This is what happens when you don't back down. The comment stream exploded again. Powerful. Her dad's a legend. SkyNova is done. But Robert wasn't ready to concede. His pride screamed louder than reason. This isn't about intimidation, he insisted, voice strained. We have procedures. If every passenger could call a powerful parent when things don't go their way, the system would collapse. Jonathan's laugh was humorless. The system collapses when those with authority abuse it. Do you understand who you are speaking to? Every SkyNova aircraft in this fleet depends on Carter Aeronautics technology. Your CEO knows my name, and she will answer my call within the hour. Now, correct this. Apologize to my daughters in front of these witnesses, or I promise you, Robert, your name will be the first in my report. Robert paled. His mouth opened, then closed. He turned to Melissa, searching for support. But Melissa was no longer standing tall. Her gaze darted to the phone's recording, to the passengers who now glared openly, to the girls who had not moved from their seats. Her confidence had withered. Melissa cleared her throat, forcing the words out. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to check the system once more. She leaned down, scanning the sisters' boarding passes again with her handheld device. The beep confirmed what had been obvious from the start. 2 valid, full-fare first-class tickets. A wave of murmurs rolled through the cabin, sharper this time, tinged with anger. Passengers exchanged glances that said, "So it was true all along." A man muttered, "Unbelievable." A woman hissed, "Disgraceful." Melissa swallowed hard, her composure cracking. "It seems everything is in order." Jonathan's voice filled the pause. "Say it clearly." "For the record." Melissa's lips trembled. She forced herself to look at the sisters. "Your tickets are valid. You belong in these seats." The words were airless, stripped of authority, but they carried weight. Imani's shoulders sagged with relief. Zara's eyes burned with triumph. But Jonathan wasn't finished. And now the apology. Melissa's eyes widened. What the apology?" Jonathan repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You attempted to strip 2 young women of their dignity in front of an entire cabin. You will apologize. Now." The passengers waited, silence pressing in again, expectant and sharp. Melissa's throat worked as she fought the words. Robert looked away, seething. Brooks shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Melissa forced out, "I apologize. I was wrong to question you. I'm sorry." The apology was brittle, but the cabin erupted in applause. Not loud, not celebratory, but steady, affirming. Margaret Fields clapped the longest, her eyes never leaving the twins. Zara lifted her phone toward Melissa, capturing every word, every flicker of discomfort on her face. The livestream comments surged. Got the apology. Hold them accountable. This video is going viral. Imani's breath trembled as she exhaled. She leaned into her sister, whispering so only Zara could hear. I hate that it had to come to this. Zara squeezed her hand. But we didn't disappear. They can't erase us now. The officer stepped back, their authority punctured. Brooks muttered something under his breath, but retreated down the aisle. Lopez followed, her expression unreadable. The thread of zip ties dissolved into memory, though the sting of humiliation lingered in every corner of the cabin. Jonathan's voice softened, though it remained firm. Stay seated, girls. The rest will be handled. I'm contacting SkyNova's CEO directly. For now, hold your heads high. The call ended, leaving behind a silence heavy with aftermath. Imani's eyes burned with unshed tears. She had survived the breaking point, but the wound of the ordeal cut deep. The stares, the accusations, the threat of force. It would not vanish with one apology. She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. Her thoughts swirled with conflict. Was it weakness to call Dad, or strength to know when to? Did we win, or did we just survive? Will they ever see us as more than what they assume Zara, though, was still alive with fire? She scrolled through the comments flying across her livestream. Thousands of voices cheering, supporting, outraged on their behalf. We're trending, she whispered. People are tagging news stations, reporters. This isn't just our fight anymore. Imani opened her eyes slowly, studying her sister's fierce expression. Part of her envied Zara's certainty, her ability to turn pain into fuel. Part of her wondered if she would ever feel that fearless. But one truth rang in her chest. They had faced the breaking point and endured. Whatever storm followed, they had refused to be erased. And the storm was only beginning. The cabin never quite settled after the apology. Even with Melissa retreating to the galley and Robert sulking in silence, the energy hung heavy, vibrating in the recycled air like static. Imani pressed her hands against her thighs, trying to still the tremors. Her body had endured so much tension that even the quiet felt dangerous, like the pause before another strike. Zara, by contrast, was electric. She hadn't stopped scrolling through her phone, narrating updates under her breath, eyes glowing with a mix of adrenaline and vindication. It's everywhere already, she whispered, half to Imani, half to herself. Clips are spreading. Someone cut together the part where they threatened zip ties. It's blowing up. Imani swallowed hard. She wasn't sure if she felt comforted or terrified. The idea that their humiliation had escaped the cabin and entered the vast, uncontrollable world of social media was dizzying. Her chest tightened at the thought of strangers dissecting her expression, her trembling hands, her silence. But another part of her clung to hope. If the world was watching, maybe justice would follow. Across the aisle, Margaret Field sat upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had resumed her stillness, but her sharp eyes never left the sisters. Occasionally, she offered a small, reassuring nod, like a silent promise that she was still on their side. A few rows back, a young man leaned forward, whispering excitedly into his phone. Yeah, I'm on the flight. It's trending right now. I'll send you the link. His words carried, confirming what Zara already knew. The cabin itself had become a stage in a global theater, the passengers unwilling extras in a play they could not leave. The intercom crackled suddenly. Melissa's voice emerged, brittle and too bright. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will be departing shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and electronic devices are switched to airplane mode. The irony made Zara snort quietly. She didn't turn off her phone. Neither did half the passengers around her. The live stream continued, stubborn and alive. As the plane finally taxied and lifted into the night sky, Imani closed her eyes, trying to find solace in the hum of the engines. But her mind refused to settle. Images of Brooks's hand reaching toward her shoulder replayed in loops, each memory sharper than the last. The sound of Lopez snapping the zip ties echoed like a gunshot in her head. And beneath it all, her father's commanding voice still resonated, steady as an anchor. Zara nudged her gently, pulling her from the spiral. "Look," she whispered, showing the screen. Their story was already being picked up by journalists. Hashtags spread like wildfire. "Do SkyNova scandal. No flying while black. Those Carter twins." Comments poured in by the thousands. Some angry, some supportive, some cruel. Imani's stomach twisted at the cruel ones. Strangers questioning their behavior. Strangers defending Robert and Melissa. Strangers spinning stories about entitled kids of a rich man. She wanted to throw the phone away, to erase the digital noise. But she couldn't. This was bigger than her discomfort now. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. "Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at cruising altitude now. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight. Relax." The word was almost laughable. No one relaxed. Not the passengers still buzzing about what they had seen, not the attendants huddled in the galley, and certainly not the sisters sitting stiff-backed in their seats, waiting for the next chapter of the storm. Because storms never end mid-air. They travel, building momentum, until they find land. On the ground, far from the quiet hum of Flight 482 phones buzzed in offices and living rooms across the country. Clips from Zara's stream appeared on news feeds within minutes. Activists reposted, lawyers commented. Former flight attendants added their voices, describing systemic patterns. By the time the plane crossed into the dark stretch over the Midwest, the story had breached national attention. In a glass tower downtown, the CEO of SkyNova Airlines, Elaine Parker, was woken by a vibrating phone at her bedside. She answered groggily, then sat up straighter as her assistant's frantic voice spilled into her ear. "There's an incident trending. 2 black teenagers, first class, accused of not belonging. It's on your airline. The video is everywhere. And Jonathan Carter is involved." Elaine swung her legs out of bed, her heart lurching. Jonathan Carter was not a name she wanted to hear in a crisis. His company powered half her fleet. His contracts held more sway than her entire board combined. If he chose, he could cripple SkyNova before breakfast. Back on the plane, Imani checked her phone again, this time for a message from her father. It arrived just as the seatbelt light pinged off. "Dad, it's spreading fast. I'll handle the executives. You two focus on staying calm. I'm proud of you both." Her throat tightened as she read it. Proud. The word wrapped around her like a blanket, soothing and suffocating all at once. Did he know how close she had come to breaking? Did he know that without Zara, she might never have made the call Zara read over her shoulder and smirked? "See, he's got this. We're not just passengers anymore. We're a story, a fight." Imani leaned her head back, staring at the dimmed cabin lights. "But I don't want to be a story. I just wanted to get to Chicago." Her whisper was barely audible, but Margaret in row 6 seemed to catch it. The older woman leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. Sometimes we don't choose the moment, dear. The moment chooses us. And when it does, standing your ground becomes history. Imani turned toward her, eyes stinging. Margaret's face softened, her silver hair glowing in the cabin light. You didn't ask for this, but you met it. That matters. The words lingered, carving themselves into Imani's heart. The plane hurtled through the night, but the sisters sat rooted in a strange stillness. Their humiliation had become a broadcast. Their fear had become fuel for a storm larger than themselves. And now, mid-air, they could only watch as the world decided what to do with their story. The comments on Zara's stream were no longer just viewers reacting. Lawyers offered help. Journalists requested interviews. A celebrity tweeted the hashtag. The fire was no longer theirs alone. It was wildfire. Imani closed her eyes again, this time not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. Yet beneath her fatigue, a quiet ember glowed. Margaret was right. She hadn't chosen the storm. But maybe she could survive it. Maybe, just maybe, she and Zara could help change the skies. Elaine Parker stood in the center of her penthouse living room, barefoot on the marble floor, staring out at the city skyline that now felt like a wall closing in. Her phone glowed in her hand. Messages flooding in so quickly the screen blurred. Executives, board members, public relations advisors all demanding her attention, all panicking. The trending hashtag scrolled before her eyes. SkyNova scandal. Carter twins. Flying while black. She pressed her fingers against her temples. The crisis had moved faster than anything she'd seen in her 20 years in aviation. One passenger incident was bad enough, but this wasn't just about a passenger. This involved Jonathan Carter, and Jonathan Carter had the power to turn inconvenience into annihilation. Her assistant's voice buzzed through the line. Elaine, it's everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, even late-night anchors are posting about it. The Carter sisters' live stream hasn't stopped. Viewership just passed 50,000. Elaine's jaw tightened. 50,000 wasn't just a viral clip. 50,000 meant national conversation. 50,000 meant lawmakers, regulators, and activists sharpening their knives. Schedule an emergency board call. She snapped. 10 minutes, and get me Jonathan Carter's number. Meanwhile, high above the clouds, Flight 482 hummed steadily across the night sky. Inside the cabin, the storm was invisible, but its tremors could be felt in every uneasy glance, every passenger refreshing their phone to watch the world react to the moment they had witnessed firsthand. Zara scrolled furiously, her eyes wide. It's insane. Imani, people are editing clips of us. Someone slowed down the part where the officer snapped the zip ties. They put dramatic music under it. It's already hit 2 million views. Imani's stomach churned. She didn't want to be part of a viral highlight reel. Every time she pictured strangers replaying her fear, her silence, her trembling voice, she felt exposed, vulnerable. Don't you see Zara pressed, nudging her? This is bigger than us. They can't bury this now. The whole country's watching. Imani stared at her sister. Her fire was undeniable, but behind it was something else, the raw, unshaken belief that this moment could shift the ground beneath their feet. Zara thrived in it. Imani survived it. From her seat, Margaret Fields watched the twins quietly. She'd seen public battles before, though none from 30,000 feet in the air. She could sense the shifting power, the way the passengers leaned toward their phones as though waiting for the next headline to drop mid-flight. Margaret had no doubt this would be in the history books tomorrow. On the ground. Elaine paced her living room, now joined by her vice president of communications via video call. The woman's face was pale, her voice taut. We need a statement. Denial will make us look blind. Admission will make us look guilty. And Jonathan Carter has already positioned himself as their protector. We are cornered. Elaine's phone vibrated again. This time, the name made her blood run cold. Jonathan Carter, she answered, forcing composure. Jonathan. His voice came through calm, precise, unyielding. Elaine, I assume you've seen what's happening? Yes, she said carefully. It's regrettable. We're investigating. Don't insult me with that word. He interrupted. This wasn't regrettable. This was systemic. Your staff humiliated 2 young women in front of an entire cabin and threatened them with force. My daughters. You know who they are. You know who I am. And you know exactly what leverage I have. Elaine swallowed, gripping the phone tighter. Jonathan, please, we can resolve this. Let me. You will resolve it, he said, publicly, immediately. You will issue a statement acknowledging fault, apologizing directly to my daughters by name, and outlining the corrective measures SkyNova will take. Otherwise, I will terminate every contract Carter Aeronautics holds with your airline by dawn. Do you understand? Her knees nearly buckled. Those contracts weren't just numbers. They were the veins of SkyNova's fleet, engines, safety systems, maintenance, all tied to Carter's empire. Without them, planes would sit grounded, shareholders would revolt, and SkyNova could collapse in weeks. Elaine's breath hitched. That would destroy us. Jonathan's voice did not waver. Then choose wisely, because I don't bluff. The call ended before she could respond. Back on Flight 482, the cabin was dimmed, but no one truly slept. Screens glowed in the dark, reflecting headlines updating in real time. Passengers whispered to each other, their voices carrying an undercurrent of awe. They knew they were inside a story bigger than themselves. Imani sat curled in her seat, watching the clouds slide past the window. For the first time since boarding, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Her father was handling it. The weight wasn't on her shoulders alone anymore. Yet, the questions in her mind refused to sleep. Would this change anything, or would it be another outrage forgotten in a week? Would people see her as brave, or just as the daughter of Jonathan Carter who had leaned on his power? Zara leaned over suddenly, her voice hushed with excitement. Look, Imani, a senator just tweeted about us. She said this can't be ignored. We're part of a national conversation now. Imani blinked at the glowing screen, the senator's words highlighted in bold. She felt both smaller and larger than herself in that moment. A single girl caught in something monumental, and yet perhaps exactly where she was supposed to be. The engines roared softly, steady, indifferent to the storm below. Yet inside the cabin, every phone vibrated with breaking news. Every passenger alive to the fact that they weren't just flying, they were living history. In Chicago, the SkyNova board call began. Faces filled the screen. Executives panicked, voices clashing. Elaine sat at the head of the table, her composure cracking. We have no choice. One board member barked, issue the apology, protect the contracts. Another snapped, do you realize the precedent this sets one family, brings us to our knees? Elaine silenced them with a raised hand. Her reflection stared back from the darkened screen, weary but sharp. She knew what had to be done. At 30,000 feet, unaware of the exact conversations unfolding below. Imani and Zara drifted into an uneasy half-sleep. The storm raged beyond their control now, sweeping through newsrooms and boardrooms alike. But within the quiet hum of Flight 482, they remained at the center, suspended between humiliation and history, fear and fire. Morning was coming, and with it, consequences. The descent into Chicago felt endless. Every dip of the plane rattled Imani's stomach, not because of turbulence, but because she knew what was waiting on the ground. She pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the city lights glitter like a sea of stars beneath them. In another life, she might have felt awe. Tonight, all she felt was dread. Zara, on the other hand, was buzzing with energy. Her phone had barely left her hand the entire flight. Even as the cabin crew announced landing preparations, she whispered updates to herself like a commentator at a championship game. Hashtag still trending. News anchors are calling it the Carter flight incident. Dad's name is everywhere. They're saying the airline's in free fall. Imani closed her eyes, wishing she could mute it all. But silence was impossible when the entire cabin was alive with the same nervous anticipation. Passengers refreshed their phones compulsively. A man in business class whispered, "There are reporters at O'Hare already." Another replied, "This is history. Everyone's watching." Margaret leaned across the aisle, her voice calm, like she had seen the storm many times before. "Prepare yourselves, girls. The hardest part of a storm is not the first strike. It's what comes after." Imani met her gaze, searching for comfort. Margaret's eyes were kind but firm, reminding her that strength was not always loud. Sometimes it was simply refusing to break when the world pressed in. The wheels hit the runway with a sharp jolt. The cabin erupted with the usual applause, though this time it felt like nervous relief rather than celebration. As the plane slowed, phones buzzed like cicadas, vibrating with incoming alerts. Imani checked hers hesitantly. Notifications swarmed the screen. News outlets had tagged her name, though she had never sought attention in her life. Strangers demanded interviews. Activists hailed her and Zara as symbols. Others questioned their motives. The weight of so many eyes made her throat ache. Zara nudged her, her grin fierce. "We're landing into history, sis. Can you feel it?" Imani didn't answer. She could feel it, but not in the way Zara did. To her, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if the ground beneath her would hold or collapse. The aircraft rolled to the gate. The familiar chime announced arrival. But instead of routine, there was tension crackling through the air. Passengers craned their necks, peering through windows. Beyond the glass, flashing lights dotted the jet bridge, not just police lights, but camera flashes rapid, relentless. Melissa's voice filled the cabin, brittle as glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop. We appreciate your cooperation." Her tone suggested control, but her trembling hands betrayed her. She knew the moment she opened that door, the narrative would escape her grasp entirely. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, a wave of passengers surged to their feet, some eager to disembark, others eager to capture the spectacle waiting outside. Imani remained frozen in her seat. Zara stood immediately, her phone raised like a shield. "Ready," Zara whispered. "No," Imani admitted softly. Zara squeezed her hand. "Neither am I, but we walk anyway." The door opened. The jet bridge flooded with sound voices shouting questions, cameras clicking, the hum of 100 overlapping demands. The twins stepped forward, and the world swallowed them whole. Flashbulbs burst in their faces. Reporters leaned over the barriers, microphones thrust toward them. Imani, Zara, how did it feel to be accused of lying? Do you believe this was racially motivated? Are you planning legal action? What did your father say to the CEO? The questions blurred together, a wall of sound battering their ears. Imani flinched, her heart hammering. Zara held her phone higher, streaming everything live. Her voice steady as she answered none of them, but captured all of them. Their father was waiting just beyond the crowd, flanked by his security detail. Jonathan Carter's tall frame cut through the chaos like a lighthouse in stormy seas. His presence was calm, but commanding, his expression unreadable as he extended his arms to his daughters. Imani nearly collapsed into his embrace, her breath shuddering with relief. Zara followed, though she kept one hand raised with her phone, still broadcasting. Jonathan's voice was low but firm. You're safe now, but listen carefully. This is only the beginning. The cameras won't stop. The questions won't stop. But you do not owe them your pain. You choose what you give. Imani clung to his words, desperate for their steadiness. She wasn't sure she had anything left to give. Zara, however, squared her shoulders. Then I choose to give them the truth, she said. Jonathan looked at her with a mix of pride and concern. Truth is powerful, but it's also heavy. Don't let it crush you. As they moved through the terminal, the crowd followed. Reporters shouted. Travelers pulled out phones to capture the moment. Security struggled to contain the tide. Everywhere the sisters turned, there were eyes, lights, and voices demanding more than they could possibly offer. At the baggage claim, Jonathan finally stopped, cameras still pressed in, but his voice carried over them with practiced authority. No further questions tonight. My daughters need rest. There will be a statement tomorrow. The reporters groaned, but Jonathan's presence left no room for argument. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd dispersed, though the clicking cameras never ceased. In the quiet of the car that whisked them away from the airport, Imani finally let the tears fall. They slid silently down her cheeks, hot with shame and exhaustion. Jonathan reached for her hand, holding it gently. You were brave, he said. She shook her head. I was scared. Bravery is doing what's right, even when you're scared, he told her. Zara leaned against the opposite window, her phone finally dark in her lap. For the first time that night, her fire dimmed. She whispered, I thought going viral would feel like victory, but it just feels endless. Jonathan nodded slowly. That's the truth of storms. They don't stop at applause. They roll until something breaks. The question is, will it be you or the system that tried to silence you? The car sped through Chicago's glittering streets, carrying them deeper into the frenzy that awaited. Inside, the sisters sat in silence, each lost in her own thoughts, each carrying the storm in a different way. For Imani, it was a weight pressing on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. For Zara, it was a fire burning through her veins, daring her to rise higher. For Jonathan, it was a battle he had fought before, now reborn in the next generation. The city lights blurred past, but one truth was clear. The Carter sisters were no longer passengers on a plane. They were passengers on history, and the world was watching every step. Morning light streamed into the Carter family's penthouse, illuminating the sleek glass walls and the quiet hum of the city below. But inside, silence was heavy. It wasn't the comfortable silence of rest. It was the tense, anticipatory silence before battle. Imani sat curled on the sofa, clutching a mug of tea she hadn't touched. The warmth seeped into her palms, but her chest still felt cold. Across from her, Zara paced with her phone in hand, eyes darting between notifications, headlines, and trending hashtags. Jonathan Carter sat at the head of the dining table, already dressed in his sharp gray suit, scanning reports laid out before him. His expression was carved from stone, unreadable. The news cycle hadn't slowed overnight. If anything, it had accelerated. Every network led with the story of Flight 482. Clips from Zara's livestream were replayed again and again, Melissa's harsh tone, Brooks's heavy hand reaching for Imani, the zip ties snapping like shackles. Commentators debated endlessly, was this racism, negligence, or both? What did it say about systemic prejudice in aviation? And above all, how would SkyNova survive Jonathan Carter's wrath? Zara thrust her phone toward Imani. Look at this. There are already petitions demanding Melissa and Brooks be fired. 20,000 signatures in less than 12 hours. And activists are planning a protest outside SkyNova headquarters today. Imani's stomach twisted. She didn't want names on petitions. She wanted peace. But peace had slipped away the moment Melissa questioned their seats. Now there was only noise, louder and louder, and she was trapped in the center of it. Jonathan cleared his throat, drawing both sisters' attention. His voice was steady, measured. SkyNova will issue a statement today. I've already spoken to Elaine Parker. She's been forced into a corner. The board wants to protect their contracts with us. They'll apologize publicly. Zara's eyes lit up. Finally, that's what they deserve. Jonathan's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. An apology is a beginning, not an end. Don't mistake it for victory. Change is not handed to us. It's taken, demanded, reinforced. This is a battle we cannot leave half finished. Imani looked down at her tea, her voice quiet. But why us? Why does it always have to be us? I just wanted to visit Grandma. I didn't want all of this. Her father's eyes softened further. He crossed the room, crouching so he was at eye level with her. I know, Imani, none of this is fair. You didn't choose this storm, but storms don't ask permission. They come, and when they do, you can either be swept away or stand and face them. And you, my daughter, faced it. That matters. She blinked back tears. He always spoke like that, with a calm certainty that steadied her even when her own heart trembled. Yet inside, she still wrestled with doubt. Did facing it really matter if she had done nothing but sit frozen in fear? Zara had been the one with fire, the one who live-streamed, the one who called him. Imani had just endured. By late morning, the statement came. Every major network cut into regular programming. A polished SkyNova logo appeared on screens, followed by Elaine Parker herself. She sat stiffly behind a desk, her expression carefully measured, though the strain in her eyes betrayed her. Last night, an incident occurred aboard SkyNova Flight 482 involving two of our young passengers, Imani and Zara Carter. The treatment they received from members of our crew was unacceptable, unprofessional, and deeply regrettable. On behalf of SkyNova Airlines, I extend my sincerest apology to the Carter family and to the public. We are launching a full investigation, and immediate action is being taken to ensure that incidents of bias and discrimination have no place in our airline. Our passengers deserve better. We will do better. The broadcast ended. Zara scoffed. She read that off a teleprompter. You can hear the lawyers in every word. Jonathan folded his hands, his face unreadable. It's a start, but actions will tell us more than words. We'll see if they follow through. Imani watched the screen, feeling a strange mix of vindication and emptiness. The world had demanded an apology and received one, but apologies were just words. Could they erase the way Melissa's voice had cut into her dignity? Could they erase the terror she had felt when Brooks reached for her shoulder? The doorbell rang suddenly. Security opened it, revealing a swarm of reporters outside the building, their cameras flashing like lightning. Microphones were raised. Voices shouted questions up the steps. Imani, Zara, how do you feel about the apology? Do you accept it? Will you sue Jonathan's security? Quickly closed the door, shutting out the noise. But the echo of it lingered in the penthouse. Zara's eyes gleamed. They want answers. Maybe we should give them some. Imani shook her head, panic rising in her chest. I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to talk to anyone. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. You don't have to. You choose when and how you speak. Don't let them force your hand. But the world outside was relentless. News trucks lined the street. Protesters gathered with signs that read justice in the skies and flying. While black is not a crime, the story had outgrown the sisters. It had become a symbol, and symbols never stayed silent. By afternoon, the fallout spread further. SkyNova stock plummeted, losing billions in market value. Shareholders demanded Elaine's resignation. Employees leaked internal memos describing years of ignored complaints about discrimination. What had begun as two sisters questioned in their seats had unraveled into a nationwide reckoning. In the quiet of her room, Imani scrolled through her phone, watching the tidal wave roll. Messages from strangers filled her inbox. Some thanked her for her courage. Some poured out their own stories of humiliation and injustice. And some, cruel and sharp, accused her of exploiting the moment, of using her father's power to manufacture outrage. Her chest tightened as she read them. She wanted to believe Margaret's words from the plane, that standing her ground mattered, but in the chaos of noise, she wasn't sure what her ground even was anymore. Zara burst into the room, phone in hand, eyes blazing. You have to see this. Dad's going on CNN tonight. He's going to confront them live. This is it. Imani, this is the fight. Imani looked at her sister, then back at her phone, then at her own trembling hands. The fight was coming whether she wanted it or not. The only question was, would she find her voice in it or let the storm carry her away? The Carter penthouse glowed with the sharp blue light of television screens. Every channel carried the same broadcast, a live debate on national news. On one side of the split screen sat Jonathan Carter, poised and calm in his tailored suit, his voice measured but resolute. On the other, Elaine Parker, CEO of SkyNova Airlines, her shoulders tight, her carefully rehearsed smile just slightly strained. Imani sat cross-legged on the floor, hugging a pillow, her pulse racing. Zara perched on the edge of the sofa, eyes locked on the screen, phone recording everything for her followers. Neither sister spoke as their father's voice filled the room, low and steady, yet edged with unmistakable steel. The facts are simple, Jonathan said. 2 teenage girls, my daughters, were singled out, questioned, and humiliated in front of an entire cabin because they did not fit someone's idea of who belongs in first class. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was prejudice, plain and simple, and it was not the first time. It will not be the last, unless we demand real accountability. Elaine cleared her throat, interjecting quickly. Mr. Carter, with all due respect, SkyNova serves millions of passengers every year. We train our crews extensively. This was an isolated incident, not reflective of our values. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his gaze direct into the camera. You call it isolated. I call it systemic. Because when two trained employees, your employees saw two young black girls and their first thought was suspicion, that reflects something deeper than training gaps. That reflects culture. And culture begins at the top. The moderator shifted nervously. Ms. Parker, critics say your apology sounded scripted, that it lacked sincerity. Do you stand by it? Elaine's jaw tightened. I stand by SkyNova's commitment to fairness and equality. We are reviewing our policies. Jonathan cut in smoothly. Policies don't matter without accountability. Words don't matter without action. So let me be clear until SkyNova demonstrates real reform. Transparent, measurable, enforced. I will suspend every contract Carter Aeronautics holds with your airline. And I will call on my partners across the industry to do the same. Gas rippled across the studio audience. Imani clutched the pillow tighter, her heart pounding. Even she, used to her father's confidence, was startled by the sheer force of his declaration. Zara's eyes widened, then gleamed with pride. He's doing it, she whispered. He's putting them on notice. Elaine shifted in her chair, her polished composure cracking just slightly. You would dismantle an entire partnership over one misunderstanding. Jonathan's reply was soft, but sharp enough to cut steel. I would dismantle an empire to protect my daughter's dignity. The silence that followed was electric. Back in the penthouse, Imani's throat constricted. Dignity. That word echoed in her chest. Her father had always told them never to surrender it. Yet she couldn't shake the memory of her own silence on the plane, the way fear had stolen her voice while her sister's fire burned bright. She wondered if she had already failed that lesson. The broadcast continued, voices clashing. Analysts weighed in. Activists tweeted in real time. Hashtags surged. The showdown had become more than corporate versus customer. It had become a referendum on how America treated its passengers, its citizens, its children. When the cameras finally cut to commercial, the Carter penthouse was silent except for the faint hum of city traffic outside. Jonathan removed his earpiece, exhaling slowly. Zara leapt to her feet, cheering. You crushed her. Dad, did you see her face when you dropped the contract bomb SkyNova's finished? Imani remained quiet, eyes still on the blank screen. She wasn't sure anything was finished, if anything. She felt like something enormous had only just begun. Jonathan turned to his daughters, his expression softening. This isn't about crushing anyone. It's about exposing truth. And truth always makes people uncomfortable. Imani hesitated, then finally asked the question that had burned in her since last night. What if nothing changes? What if they just wait until people forget? And then it all goes back to normal. Jonathan studied her face for a long moment. Then we remind them, again and again, until normal itself changes. His words were steady, but Imani's heart still wavered. Was she strong enough to keep reminding the world Zara might be? Jonathan certainly was, but she wasn't sure she could be more than a frightened girl clutching a book in seat 2A. Later that night, social media erupted. Clips from the showdown spread like wildfire. Commentators declared Jonathan Carter the most powerful voice in aviation. Protesters gathered outside SkyNova headquarters with renewed energy, chanting the sisters' names alongside calls for justice. Employees leaked stories of similar discrimination, emboldened by the spotlight. But with the surge of support came backlash. Imani scrolled through her phone in the dark of her room, reading venomous comments. They're just spoiled rich kids using their dad's power. If they weren't Carter's daughters, no one would care. This is just another stunt." Each word lodged in her chest like a stone. She wanted to throw the phone across the room, but instead she buried it under her pillow and pressed her face into the sheets. Zara burst in a few minutes later, glowing from adrenaline. "You should see the feed. People are calling us symbols of change. They're saying we're heroes." Imani rolled onto her side, her voice muffled. "Heroes don't feel like this." Zara sat on the edge of the bed, her tone softening. Maybe heroes always feel like this. Scared, tired, unsure, but they keep going anyway. Imani glanced at her sister, seeing for the first time not just fire, but also exhaustion in her eyes. Maybe Zara wasn't as unshakable as she pretended. Maybe they were both just two scared girls swept into a storm far larger than themselves. Down the hall, Jonathan stared out the window of his study, city lights reflecting in his glasses. He knew the battle wasn't over. Elaine would fight back. Shareholders would pressure. Politicians would maneuver. But he had drawn a line, and now the world had seen it. There would be no going back. For SkyNova, the night ended in chaos. Elaine faced an emergency board call, her position hanging by a thread. Executives demanded damage control. Lawyers drafted statements. Investors fled. And yet, amid the fury, Elaine's own doubt whispered, "What if he's right? What if this isn't just about one flight, but about who we are as a company?" For the Carters, the night ended in quiet. 3 figures under one roof, bound by love, by conflict, by history. Outside, the city roared. Online, the world debated. Inside, silence settled again. Not the silence of peace, the silence of waiting for the next strike. Because storms never ended with one clash. They rolled and rolled, until something finally broke. Morning broke with sirens and chants outside SkyNova headquarters. The glass facade reflected hand-painted signs and determined faces as a river of people surged across the plaza. Reporters lined the curb, their microphones lifted toward a building that suddenly looked fragile despite all its steel. Inside, elevators opened onto a corridor of suits moving fast. Voices clipped, decisions bleeding into threats. At the end of that corridor, Elaine Parker stood alone with a folder in her hands, a single page on top that listed the contracts binding her airline to Carter Aeronautics. The numbers read like gravity. She felt them drag through her bones. In the Carter penthouse, silence settled over the kitchen table, like a sheet of glass. Jonathan watched a muted feed of the protest while scrolling through a draft proposal on his tablet. He had written it between midnight and dawn, a blueprint for change he had pitched to other companies for years, now sharpened to a point for SkyNova. Imani sat across from him with a bowl of cereal, growing soft, untouched. Her phone pulsed with notifications she could not bring herself to read. Zara paced the length of the room, words tumbling from her lips in quick updates that sounded like drum beats. "They want you on the steps at noon," Zara said. "Reporters, activists, even former flight attendants. They want to hear you. Both of you." Imani swallowed hard. The idea of standing in front of cameras made her chest feel tight. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the zip ties. She heard Melissa's tone. She felt the plane narrow into a tunnel until there was no air left. She started to say no, then stopped. The memory of Margaret's voice floated back to her like a steady hand in rough water. Sometimes we do not choose the moment chooses us. Jonathan set the tablet down and looked at his daughters. "I can speak," he said. "I can negotiate, pressure, threaten, build. But there are things only you can say. If you decide to stand there, do it because you have something true that needs to be heard. If you are not ready, that is also truth. Either way, you are enough. In the same hour, the SkyNova board convened. Screens glowed with the faces of directors joining from different time zones, shoulders squared and eyes hollow, from a night without sleep. An attorney summarized risk exposure while a consultant described best practices. Investors spoke in cautions that sounded like commands. Finally, Elaine lifted the folder and said the words that changed the air in the room. "We cannot buy time. We can only change course." She clicked to a slide. It showed 6 pillars of reform, each with timelines and enforcement teeth. Bias reporting routed past middle management to an independent office. Monthly training tied to performance reviews and pay. Passenger dignity protocols embedded in crew manuals and drills. An external oversight council chaired by civil rights leaders and technical safety experts. A scholarship fund for students from communities historically locked out of aviation careers. And a binding clause that any verified discrimination would trigger automatic discipline up to termination. Reviewed by the Oversight Council, not internal politics. There was a long pause. Then a board member asked the question that mattered. "Will Carter accept this?" Elaine took a breath that felt like a fall and nodded. "He wrote it," she said, and lifted the folder. "I just agreed to carry it." On the plaza. The crowd broke into waves when the doors opened. Cameras swung. Microphones rose. Elaine stepped onto the steps without her usual polish. The sun was harsh. Her throat felt raw. For a heartbeat she saw only faces, strangers who looked like a jury. Then, beyond the barricades, she saw 2 faces she knew. Imani and Zara stood beside Jonathan, flanked by security at a respectful distance. The sisters were holding hands. Elaine began with no script. "Last night we failed. 2 young passengers were humiliated on our aircraft. We did not protect them. We did not honor their dignity. There is no policy that excuses what happened. There is only responsibility. Mine." She outlined the 6 pillars quickly but clearly. This time her voice did not sound like a lawyer's. It sounded like someone choosing to break with the person she had been yesterday. "We will implement these measures immediately. We will publish our progress every month. We will submit to oversight. We do not control. Words are not enough. Action is the only apology that matters." Questions flew. What about the employees involved? What about the officers? What about accountability at the top? Elaine answered without flinching. The flight attendant has been terminated. The supervisor is suspended pending review and will not return to passenger-facing work. We have requested a formal review of the officer's conduct by airport authorities, and we will ban them from our flights until that review is complete. As for accountability at the top, I am not resigning today, not because I cling to the chair, but because I intend to do this work and sign my name to it. If we fail again, I will step down. The crowd murmured. Some jeered. Some nodded. Cameras pivoted to capture Jonathan's reaction. He stood still, unreadable. The microphone slid toward him as if pulled by tide. Jonathan stepped up one riser, and for a moment the plaza quieted. "I do not hand out redemption. That is not my job. My job is to protect the people I love and the people who fly in these skies. If SkyNova does everything they have promised and keeps doing it after the headlines fade, then this moment will have meant something. Until then, we watch." He looked over at his daughters, and the microphones followed his gaze. The question shifted. "Imani, will you speak? Zara, what do you want to see happen next?" Zara lifted her chin. Her voice carried across the steps with the strength of someone used to turning a lens into a megaphone. I want to see a world where being young and black and in first class does not look suspicious to anyone. I want to see reporting that does not disappear into a drawer. I want to see consequences that do not skip the powerful. Then the microphones angled toward Imani. For a fraction of a second, the sound of the crowd dissolved into the memory of a cabin filled with stairs. Her hands wanted to shake. She let them. She felt the tremor and did not hide it. When she spoke, her voice was soft and very clear. I have been quiet my whole life when people stared. I thought silence was safety. On that plane, I learned silence can also be a cage. I do not want an apology that lives on a website. I want crews who pause before they assume. I want passengers who speak when they see someone being diminished. I want a sky where dignity is not an upgrade. We paid for our seats. We should not have to pay with our humanity. The plaza held still. Somewhere a siren wailed and faded. Cameras caught tears on faces in the crowd that did not belong to the sisters. Even a few executives on the steps looked away and blinked hard. A reporter called out the question that had hovered over the day. Do you forgive them? Imani glanced at Zara. Zara's eyes flashed with heat and hurt and love. All at once, Imani turned back to the microphones. Forgiveness is not a press conference. It is what grows if change is real and keeps being real. Ask me again in a year. The answer landed like an oath. By afternoon, the reforms were everywhere. SkyNova posted a public tracker of the 6 pillars with deadlines and names attached. They opened a hotline staffed by people outside the airline and pledged to publish anonymized monthly reports. The scholarship fund launched with seed money that doubled when other airlines, stung by proximity, matched it. Aviation schools signed on within hours. A legal group announced a partnership with the Oversight Council to ensure independence. Shareholders, hungry for stability, applauded cautiously. Activists, hungry for justice, demanded proof and promised to watch. Inside the Carter home, the television ran without sound, while the 3 of them sat around a table strewn with notes. The adrenaline had finally drained. Exhaustion settled in its place. Jonathan scribbled a final amendment to the language he had sent Elaine earlier and pushed the tablet away. Done, he murmured, though he knew nothing was truly finished. Imani leaned her head on the back of the chair and stared at the ceiling. In the quiet, the cabin scene replayed again, but it felt further away, as if someone had turned down the volume on that memory. Her voice on the steps sounded louder instead. It was small next to the crowd, and yet it had reached the edge of the plaza, and then the edge of the city, and then the morning shows that would replay it tomorrow. She wondered if that was what courage felt like. Not a roar, but a steadying. Zara slid into the chair beside her and bumped shoulders. You were perfect, she said, then smiled for real, softer than any grin she had offered a camera. I kept waiting for your voice to break. It never did. Imani laughed once, surprised by the sound. It broke, she said. I just kept talking, in a quiet office across town. Elaine watched the same clip of Imani speaking. The words dismantled something she had built inside herself, a small defense that had insisted this was only about optics. She closed her eyes, let the defense fall, and opened her email. To her staff she wrote a short note. We have chosen a harder road. Walk it with me or step aside. Night returned. The plaza emptied. The last satellite truck rumbled away, in a room that finally felt like home again. Imani set her phone face down and let the darkness be only darkness. Zara curled up at the foot of her bed and fell asleep mid-sentence. Jonathan gently pulled a blanket over both of them and stood for a long moment, just listening to his daughters breathe. Beyond the windows, planes stitched lines of light across the sky. Somewhere, in one of those cabins, a young person took a seat they had paid for and felt eyes sweep over them. Somewhere, a crew member paused. Somewhere, a passenger cleared her throat and stood. The breaking point had come and broken something open. Now it was the work of days and months to keep it open, to let light through, to make the skies remember. 6 months later, the sky over the city was the same color it had been the morning after Flight 482, a pale sheet ripening toward gold. The world looked familiar. The world felt different. The plaza outside SkyNova headquarters no longer hosted cameras on tripods or rows of protest signs. The steps were just steps again. People moved in and out with coffee cups and ID badges, not with megaphones and chants. Yet if you stood very still, you could hear a new rhythm in the building, the hum of a place that had decided it would not be what it was before. Imani woke in her own bed to the sound of an airplane miles overhead. The old ache did not rise to meet it. She still remembered the click of zip ties and the heat of 100 eyes. She remembered it clearly, but the memory no longer owned her. On her nightstand sat a folded copy of a magazine that had run a story about the twins. The headline had been soft and careful, like hands reaching to lift rather than to prod. She had read it once, and then slipped the magazine beneath a stack of schoolwork, not to hide it, but to let it rest where it belonged, among the ordinary pieces of her life. Down the hall, Zara filmed a short video on her phone with the bright morning light behind her. She spoke about the scholarship applications that had flooded the new program, about the first class of students who would study avionics and maintenance, some of them first in their families to enter college. She kept the camera steady, her voice warm. In the beginning, she had recorded everything like a race, breathless and urgent. Now she paced herself. She paused for air. She let silence carry weight. Jonathan stood at the stove in shirt sleeves, flipping pancakes for his daughters the way he had when they were small, and Saturdays felt like proof that the week had survived. He looked tired in a way that meant he had poured himself out, not in a way that meant he was empty. The reform framework he had delivered in the days after the crisis had turned into calendars and checklists and real people doing the work. He now chaired a coalition of airlines and suppliers who had adopted the same standards, some with reluctance and some with conviction. He still received angry messages. He also received letters from flight attendants who felt safer making the right call because the rules finally backed their conscience. SkyNova's public tracker went live on the 1st of each month. It showed numbers that mattered, reports filed and closed, training completion rates, disciplinary actions taken when bias was verified. The Oversight Council published short case summaries that protected privacy while refusing to protect comfort. The Scholarship Fund posted photographs of students in first-semester labs with safety glasses and open notebooks. The pictures traveled farther than any press release because they looked like hope. Elaine Parker kept her job. That truth still surprised some people, and it angered others. But inside the airline, her presence meant signatures on dotted lines and hard conversations in rooms that used to avoid hard things. She visited crew bases with a binder that had notes in the margins and first names underlined. She sat in a training room in Dallas while a young flight attendant described the fast math of a boarding gate, the pressure to move a line and the pull of assumptions that disguise themselves as instinct. Elaine did not counter or correct. She wrote down every word and asked what the manual should say to interrupt that pull. When someone asked why she had not resigned, She said because walking away is easier than walking through. If we are going to become different, someone has to stand here and keep the door open while the wind blows. One quiet afternoon in autumn, the sisters stepped into the Smithsonian Annex for a small ceremony that had never been planned and could not have been predicted. A curator welcomed them to a room lined with artifacts from the long, uneven history of flight. Old turbine blades, faded crew uniforms, a time-worn sign that once told passengers who would be seated where, a sign that looked innocuous until you remembered what it had enforced. The curator showed them a display that had been assembled quickly, a modest case near the back. Inside was a printed screenshot of an anonymized version of the livestream counter from the night of Flight 482, frozen at the moment it had passed 38,000. Beside it lay a copy of the reform framework with red marks in the margins. The first draft Jonathan had sent Elaine. At the bottom of the placard, the curator had printed a line from Imani's words on the steps. "I want a sky where dignity is not an upgrade." Imani stood very still in front of the case. She felt proud and quiet at once, like a bell rung once and then left to glow. Zara wrapped an arm around her and whispered that the font looked too small. Imani laughed, the sound easy. The curator smiled and promised to change it. There were other markers no museum could hold. A crew member on the Boston route who paused before speaking and checked a computer rather than a hunch. A gate agent in Phoenix who invited a passenger to step aside to resolve an issue in private rather than announce suspicion to a row of seats. A man in 3C who asked the person in 3B if they wanted him to stand with them while they clarified a mix-up. These stories arrived as text messages and emails and comments that sounded almost ordinary. Ordinary was the point. The extraordinary belonged to the night of the crisis. The everyday belonged to the future. One evening, long after the frenzy had cooled, the twins boarded a short flight to visit their grandmother. They carried overnight bags and a bag of mango candies that their grandmother loved. The boarding area felt like a place they had been born into, rather than a place they had been made to explain. The agent scanned their tickets. The beep sounded like any other beep. They walked down the jet bridge side by side. Imani felt her breath deepen without her trying to command it. In first class, the seats were the same color and shape as before, but the cabin felt wider. A young flight attendant with a braid and tired eyes smiled and asked their names rather than their reasons for being there. She crouched to eye level, the way you do when you want to meet someone rather than manage them. She said she had watched their testimony before the congressional subcommittee and that the part about silence being a cage had stayed with her. She said she had taken the new training seriously because someone had finally written it in a way that spoke to the reality of the aisle. The words warmed Imani the way strong tea warms your hands. She did not feel like a symbol. She felt like a person whose words had found a home in someone else's mouth. Midway through the flight, a small disturbance broke out in row 3. A man argued with a crew member about a seat assignment. His voice was sharp. His frustration slid toward contempt. The new protocol unfolded like choreography. The attendant listened. She repeated the facts. She invited the man to step into the galley to talk in private. When he refused, another attendant approached and asked a nearby passenger if they would be comfortable moving so that the issue could be resolved without standing over anyone. The heat left the moment like steam leaving a pot. The man sat. The plane exhaled. Zara watched and said nothing to her phone because she had chosen not to film this trip. She squeezed Imani's hand and let the quiet hold. She thought about all the times she had used a lens to make the world see, all the times that lens had protected and provoked and consumed. Now she could feel a new skill growing, the skill of putting the phone down and knowing the work could continue without her narration. She would still post. She would still prod the world when it slept. But she would also give it room to do the right thing without a chorus. A week later, the Oversight Council held a public forum in a city library. Margaret Fields took a seat in the front row with a tote bag of case briefs. When the moderator asked for comments from the floor, she rose with the same steady presence she had carried on the plane. She spoke about the difference between punishment and accountability, about how the first satisfies and the second transforms. She praised the crew who had learned, the managers who had changed practice, the officers who had been retrained in de-escalation rather than simply reassigned. She finished by reminding the room that dignity is not a gift from the powerful. It is a practice we owe each other. After the forum, the sisters found her by the exit, where the light slanted just right for photographs that felt like postcards you would actually keep. Margaret hugged them both and told Imani she had found her voice exactly when she meant to, neither sooner nor later. She told Zara that fire needs a hearth to keep burning, and the world was lucky that the twins had built one together. When winter came, the Carter family decorated their living room with strings of soft white lights and a cut tree that filled the place with the scent of cold forests. Friends and mentors came by in small clusters that felt human rather than monumental. Laughter curled into the corners of the room. Jonathan stood with a paper plate of cookies and listened while a former flight attendant described the first time she used the new app to escalate a concern and actually received a call back within the hour. She kept saying, actually, as if it were the most beautiful word in the language. Later that night, when the house finally quieted, Imani sat at the window and watched a plane lift into the dark. She did not imagine the worst thing anymore when she heard the rumble. She imagined a dozen stories unfolding inside that metal tube. Strangers writing temporary sentences near each other and trying to do no harm. She whispered the line her father had given her years ago and that she had now made her own. Stay calm. Stay respectful. Do not give away your dignity. And then she added the line the world had taught her. When the moment chooses you, speak. The next morning, she and Zara returned to the museum with a group of students from the scholarship program. The room with the display had a new card beside the case, hand-lettered by a teacher who had borrowed the words, "Justice requires witnesses." The students read the line aloud and asked questions about what to do when a witness is afraid. Imani said that fear does not disqualify you. It is the signal that something important is happening and that you are alive to it. Zara said that when you lift a phone, you are lifting a mirror, and that a mirror without courage only shows a face. With courage, it shows a path. They left the museum and walked out into a morning that promised snow by evening. The city looked like a place that remembered how to start over. Planes sewed their way across the sky, stitching one edge of the day to the other. The sisters stood for a moment on the steps and watched one pass directly overhead. It roared and was gone. They smiled at nothing and at everything. The cameras are gone. The reforms remain. A boarding pass still beeps, but now there is a pause before anyone assumes. A crew member checks facts. A passenger speaks up. A young person sits in the seat they paid for and is seen as a person first. 6 months after Flight 482, the sky looks the same, yet it holds a different promise. Hold space for Imani's quiet courage. Honor Zara's bright fire. Respect a father who would dismantle an empire to protect his daughters. Remember Margaret, who stood and made truth feel simple. And do not forget the harm that started it all. Discrimination is not a misunderstanding. It is a choice made or unmade in 100 small moments. We condemn it without apology. We choose a better practice of dignity. When the moment chooses you, be the witness who speaks. Be the neighbor who refuses to look away. Be the traveler who makes the aisle kinder. If this story resonated, please like this video, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Your voice keeps these stories alive and pushes the next one into the light. Stay with us for the upcoming episode, where everyday courage turns another closed door into an open sky.